Good afternoon, 33 years in 31 days, day 23, looking at 2012, early broadcast today. Early because suddenly realised that tonight there's a bunch of friends, we're all getting together online and we're playing Blockbusters. Several families, all on a Zoom call, playing Blockbusters. Goodness knows. We did Trivial Pursuits the other week where I had a tripod with the camera pointing down on the board. How we're going to do Blockbusters, I don't know, but I'll have a pee, please, Bob. But welcome along. Thank you for dropping in. Jenny, good to see you here. I know it's a bit earlier today, so hopefully there'll be, some people will have to catch up on replay, but I timed this just so that it's before Harry and Dave do their regular broadcast on a Saturday, which I think is normally about 3:30, 4 o'clock. So it doesn't clash with theirs, because I wouldn't like people to be fighting over or torn between where to go, here or there. Yeah, you'd probably go there, you're right. But anyway, there we are today, looking at 2012. As I alluded to yesterday, it's quite an interesting year, 2012. We've stepped into social media anonymously, and that's not really opened any doors yet. We talked about how it became a little bit scary at times with followers and wondering, every person you're looking at and wondering, are they going to trip me up? Is somebody trying to, undermine me and identify who I am? Is somebody trying to trip me up so they can discipline me and stop this? Because police forces didn't know what to do with social media, and in some cases still don't. They're a lot better, but anyway. First things first, 2012 opened up a door to me, and here's something that I never, ever envisaged in my career. But it starts with the cuts to policing and everything that was going on in policing at the time that led the National Police Federation to organise a march in London. They organised a march in London for thousands and thousands of cops from around the country to all gather by the Tate on the banks of the Thames, and then march all the way out through past the Home Office, past the Houses of Parliament, up Whitehall, round Trafalgar Square, under Admiralty Arch, and then we just disbanded just on the other side of Admiralty Arch on the Mall, near to the National Police Memorial. And that was a big thing. That was a really big thing. And out of the blue, and something that I hadn't or wasn't expecting at all, was I was contacted by the BBC. Now that, if there's nothing else, having spent my time in the police since 1991, where you're consistently told at incidents, if you're at a major incident or you're at the scene of a major crime or whatever it happens to be, and you're approached by the press, say nothing, refer them to the corporate communications team. Say nothing. Don't tell them anything. I grew up in that sort of, that culture. In some regards, that culture is still there. And in some regards, for certain circumstances, that culture still needs to be there. Because much as I might have plenty of critical things to say about the way that forces communicate to people and how they use social media, when it comes to the big stuff, there's an awful lot of cops who don't really understand all the legislation that swings around court cases and privacy and human rights and all that kind of stuff. They don't really think that deeply. But when it comes to a big job, it's like it could blow the whole job out of the water. So it's got to be managed really carefully. And then they know what they're doing and they know what they're talking about. So BBC approached me. What do I do? But it's not television, it's radio. And it's not just sort of like BBC Midlands or BBC Northwest or whatever. National BBC, and the radio station that I listen to more than anything else. As I've got older, I listen to it even more as well. Radio 4. And they wanted me to go on BBC PM. their flagship evening news program at 5 o'clock. Scared to death. Spoke to a friend who is the chief exec of a very, very large company who has been interviewed on the Today program on Radio 4 a number of times. Took some advice from him. He said, well, what program are you going on? I said, PM. He said, less likely to be adversarial like it is on Today in the morning. So he said, more likely to be a more relaxed interview and Q&A sort of session. So he said, you should be fine, don't you know? But, you know, you'll be fine with it. If you've been watching these broadcasts, you'll also know that over the years, Paul McKeever had always been very supportive of me, and he'd said, in fact, it wasn't the other broadcast, it was the tweets that are put out for the 10 most influential people to me during my police time on Twitter, the 10 years that I've been on Twitter, who are the 10 most influential people. One of those people was Paul McKeever, and he was the national chairman of the Police Federation. I had absolutely zero, nothing, zilch, nada involvement with my local police federation branch. I didn't know who they were. I could have walked past them in headquarters or in the custody suite and wouldn't have known who they were. Didn't have any connection with them whatsoever. I suppose that maybe that's a good thing, because generally it means you haven't got into trouble. But I didn't know them. But Paul had approached me sometime earlier and was saying, you know, you're an anonymous police officer, but you're tweeting and blogging a lot of common sense and da-da-da-da. If there's anything you ever need or you need help with, just ask, let me know, that occasion. And as with many things, it's very easy to say things, but it's far more difficult to actually deliver. He'd left me, what did he leave me? He left me with, it was a Twitter DM. And I sent him a DM and I said, with regard to the above, I need to speak to you. Within the space of about 5 minutes, I got a telephone number. I rang him. I spoke to somebody else who said, he's driving at the minute, but I'm on his phone, blah, blah, blah. What's it about? Spoke to him. He said, blah, blah, blah. He relayed it to Paul, who said, he's got all that. He'll give you a call back later. Is this number okay? So I said, yes, it's fine. Paul McKeever rang me back, spoke to me at length about radio and TV interviews, spoke to me at length about what I thought I was being interviewed about. And I wanted to make sure, as much as anything else, that I was saying what I felt and how I felt about it, but also staying on the right page with the Police Federation, who I was ultimately supporting by going to London to march. And so that was it. The march in May was on whatever day it was. I travelled down to London on train the day before. In fact, it was the day of it was in February, and it was the day of my birthday. No, tell a lie. It wasn't. That was his memorial. Oh, that's a sad reminder. But it was in March. So I went down on the train the day before, stayed in a hotel that belonged to a group that my wife worked for. So I got a great rate in a hotel out in the north side of London in Hendon. And they said to us, can you be at Wood Lane for 9:15? Now, bear in mind, how old would I have been? 2012. Just turned 40, 42, something like that. Early 40s. I had been to London quite a few times in my dispatching days before I joined the police, and I was driving all around the country as a courier in a van. Went to London many times. Put my feet on the floor in London to walk from my van to where I was doing a delivery, walk back and drive out. I'd sometimes drive out of London a different way just to catch some sights. Maybe if I'd gone south of the river, I'd drive around to come over Tower Bridge rather than just sort of going the immediate route. Or maybe I'd drive back so I could do Trafalgar Square and then up the Mall and all that kind of stuff. But at 40 odd years of age, this was the first time that I put my feet down on the floor in London, rode the tube, and actually walked around and had a look at things. My guide the night before that event is Veep on Twitter, Princess of VP. Been a great friend to me. She was my guide around London that afternoon and evening. She showed me all sorts of places. We went to Covent Garden, we had dinner, and had a lovely time. And then party company, she went home, I went back to the hotel. Now the BBC had said to me, can you be at Wood Lane for 9:15? As I've just said, I didn't even know what how the tube worked. I knew the map to it. If somebody said, "What's that?" I say, "Oh, it's the London Underground map." It meant nothing to me. I hadn't got a clue. So I said, "They said, can you be at Wood Lane for 9:15?" And I said, "Probably, but I don't really know London, and it could go horribly wrong. Don't worry, we'll send a car." So at whatever time in the morning, maybe 8:30, 8:15, something like that, there's a taxi provided by the BBC, picks me up at the hotel, drives me across London to Wood Lane, and drops me off at that iconic BBC building in London. It was like Alice in Wonderland to a certain degree. It was like, what am I doing here and how did I end up here? All I do is write a blog, which a few people read, and tweet stuff on Twitter. How come I'm here? Anyway, I went into reception. I was met. They had me sit down for a while. Somebody came out. One of the producers came out and met me. They took me through into one of the newsrooms. Martha Carney was in there. But we didn't actually get to meet face to face. But she tweeted me as I'd left saying, "How is it you've been in my office and we didn't get to meet?" Which was lovely. But they sorted everything out, and then they introduced me to the news legend that was on BBC Radio 4, no longer is, but still is a radio legend, and that's Eddie Mair. Took me to one side, and Eddie Mair was very relaxed, put me very much at ease, and asked me what it was about and why I was in London and what I was doing. And the only thing that I asked at that time, because I was so nervous and concerned about stuff, was I said, "Can you please anonymize everything about me and use somebody for my voice?" And they did. They used one of the producers within the program who reproduced all my words, amazingly with the same sort of intonation and feel that I'd used. Very, very clever and well done. But so we did that. They then provided me with another taxi because I was at Wood Lane. They provided me with another taxi that took me from Wood Lane to the start of the march, where I met with Veep and a couple of other people. And I couldn't find my own force in the great big long queue of people that were forming up. I couldn't find my own force. So I walked with Dorset Police and their federation and their representatives. So I met Clive Chamberlain, if you know him, he was there with them. And we walked and we did the march, and it was fabulous. Had a wonderful day. And on the drive home, in fact, no, I must have driven down. I didn't go on the train. I drove down to London to the hotel and then tubed in and out. So I when it came to getting back to the hotel, I took the tube. Didn't go wrong. It was straight up the Northern Line for me, fortunately, which was really quite easy. Up the Northern Line, got off at I think it's North Hendon or Hendon Central or something like that, and then drove home. And on the drive home, I listened to PM and the broadcast, and it was quite bizarre listening to myself on national BBC Radio 4 talking about what we were about to do and what had actually happened that day. It's quite a moment, but built quite a reasonable relationship up there with the team at Radio 4, which was quite nice, which led to some work later with Don't Stream and Drive as well, which was good. But there we are. So what have I next got down here? Now then, here is my. This is something that I have never ever spoken about on Twitter or social media or anywhere, apart from with my friends and family and what have you. But there was a morning when I was in custody. There were three sergeants on. Myself, Chris, and Lee were the three sergeants. We were sat there. It was early morning, doing our own stuff. The inspector came down. I was busy doing something, and he came down, and I could overhear him talking to the other two sergeants about a big job happening, and somebody would be coming in, and they'd need somebody to be dedicated to that person all day. And because I wasn't really paying attention, they said, "Neil will do it." And I looked up from what I was doing and turned around and said, "Sorry, what am I doing?" And they said, "There's somebody coming in and you've been nominated to look after him all day." So I said, "Oh, right, okay. Who is it?" Stuart Hall. Lancashire Police were running an operation, and they were arresting Stuart Hall that morning. And Stuart Hall, to me, as a kid, was the bloke with uncontrollable laughter doing It's a Knockout. He was the sports commentator. He was on local radio. He was everywhere. An iconic sort of voice and character, particularly national stuff, but particularly in the Northwest as well. And he was coming in. So I got myself prepared and thought, it's no different to anybody else. It's just, down the line and all the rest of it. And the van arrived. We let them in through the airlock. They came straight in. They brought through. He stood in front of me. Said, "Good morning, Mr. Hall." And he opened his mouth, and I just sort of, it took me by surprise, because that voice of his is, and I'm not showing any sort of admiration or anything. I know what he did. I know what he got jailed for and all the rest of it. But that voice to me was iconic. And it just sort of stopped me in my tracks just for a moment to think, crikey, that fella that has always been in and around radio and television and been in front of me so many times on the TV and stuff, he's now stood in front of me, and I'm in charge and responsible for him. To cut a very long day short, it was a 12-hour shift. I actually stayed on 13 hours to finish that shift that day. The bobbies from Lancashire were incredibly well prepared. I spent, as I discussed the other day, where I spent some time sat in a cell with a juvenile that was a camera cell, so there couldn't be any sort of comeback on me doing anything that I shouldn't, but sat in the cell and spoke to a juvenile. I did spend some time stood in the cell talking with Stuart Hall about the processes and what would follow, and how things would be. I'm not going to disclose any more of that, but it was a bizarre circumstance. He went through a number of interviews during the day. He had a barrister with him that came to represent him in custody, which is unusual, not unheard of, but unusual. It's normally solicitors or solicitors' legal reps that do all the representation in custody. But it was a barrister that came to represent him. They interviewed him, and then we got authority to charge. I set up all the charges. They brought him out. I authorized, and then had all the charges read out to him. And then he was to be bailed. And I set bail, and I set a number of bail conditions. His barrister very politely and very professionally challenged every single one of my bail conditions, every one of them. But I countered with the reasons why those bail conditions were being put in place. And he said, Very well, Sergeant. You've made your representations. I understand it's your decision. So I'll seek to redress these at the court. But thank you very much for taking the time to discuss it with me. Ever so polite. Unlike, not all, but unlike some solicitors who would come into custody who sort of just expect you to bow and scrape. But ever so polite, very polite gentleman. And then we arranged, because of media interest. Lancs had pulled a bit of a fast one because suddenly it was all over the media that the arrest had taken place, and Lancashire had effected it. But everybody was sort of expecting that he would be back in Lancashire. And Lancs police had actually pulled a bit of a flanker and said, we're not taking him to Skelmersdale or our nearest custody suite within Lancs from where we've arrested him. We're going to take him to Cheshire and keep him in Cheshire. So that we didn't have a huge amount of, we didn't have any media presence outside the custody suite, which you might have expected. But there was media interest and there was talk going on in the media about it. Nobody really knew where he was. So we arranged to have somebody come and collect him, and instead of just showing him out the front door and saying, there you go, we allowed their vehicle to come into the van dock. He got in the van dock and the vehicle drove away, and that was that. The only thing that I would say further to that is that when he appeared before the court, the Crown Court judge reinforced word for word my bail conditions. Which was sort of a reassurance to me that A, I'd made my arguments correct, B, I'd made good, sound, sensible bail conditions, and the Crown Court judge just went, they'll do, stamped, done. It was a very surreal experience, but if it's a claim to fame while I was in custody, it's the only one I've got. I mean, I met a number of Coronation Street stars when I was on routine section patrol at Manchester. Sat having tea with Deirdre Barlow. I sat having a cup of tea in her conservatory with Deirdre Barlow and her husband, when they'd had something stolen from the front of their house. Lovely, lovely couple. Really lovely house in Didsbury. But yeah, this. If it was a claim to fame, that was my claim to fame in custody, is that I booked in, charged, and put bail conditions on Stuart Hall. Other than that, there's a big thing comes about in 2012, and that is that I'm sat in custody one night, probably towards the end of 2012. I'm sat in custody one night, and you get the message, and it says, from the phone call, from the inspector, Neil, can you pop up and see me? Now, if the inspector's got something he wants to talk to you about, they generally came down to us and just said, oh, can you have a look at that for me? And is everything all right? Yeah. All right, see you later. When they say, come up and see me, it's like, what have you done? What have I've messed up somewhere, or there's a complaint, or something's gone wrong. So I go upstairs, walk into his office, leave the door's propped open. I walk in and he says, do you want to shut the door, Neil? When they say that, you think, oh, blimey, what is it? So I shut the door. He says, come in, sit down, sits me down. How long have you been a custody sergeant, Neil? Gosh, sir, probably 5, 6 years, maybe now, 4, 5 years, something like that. Right. So you're a custody sergeant. Or are you the custody sergeant? I sat there for what seemed like an eternity, this like a horror film, and I thought, oh my word, what is it? What? And so I just sort of looked a bit odd at him, just sort of think, what are you talking about? And he looked at me, and I thought, I can't keep that up, and I can't lie to him to his face. So I said, yeah, I am. Oh, they didn't know what to do with me. They were, I think, right at the top of the chain at headquarters. They were scared to death, wondering what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. I know the chief inspector looked at ways to discipline me about it, and went to professional standards and said, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to deal with this? Blah, blah, blah. And they said, unless you can link it to performance, You haven't got nothing on him. Is he doing anything or saying anything he shouldn't? Is he breaching anything? No, no, no. But he's tweeting at work and da da da, and he's blogging about stuff. Well, unless his performance is rubbish, no. That chief inspector pulled me apart for the number of tweets I sent one night in the early hours of the morning, at 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and it was a ridiculous amount of tweets when you look at it in isolation. About 60 odd tweets in the early hours of the morning, and I was pulled apart for it. And I said, well, but I was talking to somebody on Twitter who wanted to be a police officer, and I was giving them feedback and giving them support and encouragement and steering them in certain directions about how they could be a police officer and what being a police officer is like. And did I neglect my detainees? No. They were still looked after and cared for. Did my custody records fall apart and was shoddy and didn't have the right entries on them? No. I did my job and did that, and yet they wanted to pull me apart about it. Unfortunately, they couldn't. And oddly, recently, just as I retired, that same chief inspector tried to say that they'd kept me going by not getting me into trouble for sending so many tweets at that time of night. And you look and you think, why did you feel the need to say that? There's absolutely no need to say that, and that isn't actually how it played out and unfolded. How it unfolded was, yeah, I did send all those tweets, but you couldn't prove I'd done anything wrong. So it's not that you stepped in and saved me from getting into trouble. You didn't. You couldn't. I wasn't in trouble, and you couldn't prove that I was in trouble. Anyway, there starts a long, many years of upset and hurt, and people across the organisation deliberately trying to get in the way and interfere and stall and thwart and trip up and do anything that they could to undermine the stuff that I was doing, despite getting national support from around the country from other people. Really, really odd. And I'm not bitter about it anymore. I was at the time. I'm not bitter about it anymore. But I have an award, which we'll talk about later, and I kept that award on the side of my desk at work in the control room to remind me that no matter what other people say, you're doing the right thing, you're getting the right things done, and other people recognise it, even if you don't. And so that was that. March in May, Eddie Mair, BBC PM, Paul McKeever, being identified as the custody sergeant. The big thing that came out of my meetings with everybody was that they said, we can't stop you tweeting. So they were accepting that they couldn't stop me from using Twitter and they couldn't stop me from using social media because my performance was spot on in the custody suite. It was faultless. However, what they could say is said, we will not allow you to tweet whilst you're at the desk on duty. Before you come into work, during your ref's break, when you go home from work, as long as you don't cross over the line, you can do whatever you like on social media. But while you're at the charge desk, no way. I had to take it on the chin. Okay, that's fine. More about that one, I think tomorrow. Yeah, more about that one tomorrow. But that was the upshot of that. They still didn't know what to do with me. I had to be very careful. How they identified me, I'm not quite sure. And it doesn't really matter. But what I do know is that I'd spoken to both my colleagues who I trusted implicitly, so I don't point the finger at them at all, and said to them, you guys need to know something. And I said, and it was out of fairness and respect to them, I said, this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm at on social media. This is how many followers I've got. This is the blog that I'm writing. Don't want you to be in the dark about that in case anything comes up, because people will be hunting for me and people will be trying to find me and squash me. I said, so I don't want you to be blind to it. I want you to know about it. And they were ace. They were ace. So that was that. And what it also led to was I spent a day with corporate communications, because the chief inspector, despite what she said recently and despite what she said at the time, she also actually said, well, there is a lot of good that you're doing there, and there is a lot of stuff that's coming out of it that's quite useful and very pro-police and da-da-da-da-da. Maybe you've got skills that you can share with corporate comms, and maybe they've got stuff they can share with you. So it was arranged that I went to corporate communications for a day, and I spent a day with them talking about my use of social media and what I do. They talked about their social media and what they do. I gave them a whole wheelbarrow load of ideas and thoughts about what they could be doing with their own social media. They loved it. They thought it was great. I went away. We'll see what happens with that tomorrow. So that's all for now. Take care. Have a great afternoon and evening. Like I say, we're playing Blockbusters online with a load of friends tonight on a Zoom call. So that's why today's is early. Thank you for dropping in. Hope to see you tomorrow on day 24, looking at 2013, where we continue my social media journey and some more developments on stuff that we've talked about today. But that's it. Paul McKeever today, being identified as the custody sergeant, booking Stuart Hall into custody. Oh, and one other thing for 2012. As you know, 2010, we were in Scilly. We went early. My wife was very pregnant. My son was born a few months later. We went in 2011 to Scilly again. I was on Twitter at this point, but not much going on. And then I discovered somebody on Twitter that I started to follow and I built a great friendship up with. And in 2000, let me just get the photograph, because there is a photograph of this. Hang on one second. There was definitely a photograph of this. Just bear with me while I scoot around to find it. I can remember seeing it. I can remember putting it into this folder, so it must be there. Where are you? There. Let's open that up. So, bring myself back on the screen there. Right, okay. So 2012, we'd been on holiday in 2010. We went back in 2011. We went back in the summer of 2012. But in the summer of 2012, I was following somebody who was very local to that location. And I knew what he looked like. And it was really obvious what he looked like because he was swanning around in a police sergeant's uniform. He didn't know what I looked like. But there's a photograph. Anybody can, there's only a handful of people in here, but does anybody that's watching know who that is? Who is that that's shaking my hand? That's my weedy looking right arm and his rather muscly right arm. But does anybody know who that is? I'm not going to give you very long to answer, but Jenny's thinking about it. That is Sergeant Colin Taylor, the Scilly sergeant. We were on holiday on the Scillies. He'd walked up to the campsite to meet me. He met us, he had a chat and what have you. And again, because of the anonymity thing, Force had identified me. But as far as the rest of the world was concerned, I was still anonymous. So that's why that photograph is like that. Just the hands. It doesn't matter about Colin so much, but it does matter about me, because I couldn't have a photograph with my face on because I was still anonymous. So I met the Scilly sergeant on the Isles of Scilly. We went out one evening and had a few beers. Really, really lovely guy. If you haven't read his book, go and get it and read it. It's brilliant. But spent some time and with him, and the following year, if not 2013, well then definitely 2014, we were back on Scilly, and we spent more time with him. I actually went out on his boat and we went fishing, which was just brilliant. And it has to be said, he makes the best smoked mackerel pate going. Brilliant. But that's all for today. So thank you for dropping in day 23 for 2012. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow for 2013 with day 24. So have a lovely evening. Take care wherever you are, and I'll see you tomorrow for more of 33 years in 31 days. See you later.